first thing I want to say is how impressed I am with all of the non-English speaking speakers that got up here and delivered. I couldn't imagine attempting to deliver a presentation to you in Swedish. So I'm very impressed and appreciate that. So I also want to make sure that everybody here is awake. So do me a favor. I want everybody to raise their hand. Okay, good. So I'm going to be asking you questions. Keep your hands up. And I want everybody to actually vote, okay? So first of all, I'm with a company called Infor. Keep your hand up if you know who we are. Okay, good. You can put them down. I just wanted to make sure your arms were working. Appreciate that. So we are an enterprise software company based out of New York. We have a full suite of human capital solutions. I know we used to say everything from hire to retire. Now it's everything from pre-hire to rehire. But we're not here to talk about Infor. By the way, my name is Marcus Mossberger, and I am a recovering HR practitioner. You're supposed to say, "Hi, Marcus." Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about this idea of balancing data and discernment in this new world of digital HR that we live in. And so I've got a bit of an agenda here, and we're going to start with the why, right? So why should we change? And I have a picture of a car there for a very important reason. So on the way to the conference today, here's where you're going to have to use your arms again, but you're ready, right? How many of you took a taxi to get here? Okay. How many of you took an Uber or some other rideshare? Okay. How many of you took a self-driving car? Nobody? That's weird, because Elon Musk said we're all going to have them by next year, and he's really good at meeting deadlines, right? So the idea of transportation changing, right? You touched on that in the last presentation, right? How much it's changed. You had Tesla up there above Ford, right, in terms of market share. So there is a reason for us in the HR discipline to change so that we don't end up like one of those organizations that's getting left behind, one of those disciplines of corporate organizations that get left behind. So I know that our friends in Germany are the ones that invented the car, right? But in the States, where I'm from, Henry Ford is often looked at as the individual that brought cars to the masses. And there's a great quote from Henry Ford. He said, "If I would have given my customers what they wanted, I would have given them faster horses," right? So again, how do we think differently about how we provide HR services in organizations? And the second piece here is kind of the art of the possible. What could we be doing differently? And we've talked already a lot today about culture and performance and engagement. And a lot of these things are really hard to measure and define, am I right? So how can we start using data to better define some of those things? However, the last piece is really important too. We can't go too far afield and ignore the human element, right? So it's going to end up being a balancing act if we do it right. Make sense? And then I've got some time there for Q&A at the end. However, if you have a question, like right now, if you have a comment, maybe a clever insult, feel free, okay? You don't have to wait till the end, okay? Okay, so let's start with the why. Has anyone seen that Simon Sinek TED Talk about starting with the why? Do y'all watch TED Talks? It's a great one if you haven't seen it. He's a fantastic speaker. He's got multiple good books too, but starting with the why is really important. And again, what's interesting to me so far throughout the day is the recurring themes that keep coming up in every one of these presentations. And I think artificial intelligence seems to have replaced big data as like the buzzword term that everybody's talking about, right? You can't go online or pick up a paper without reading about how all of our jobs are going to go away. Now, the reality is technology has always created more jobs than it's destroyed. But what happens is those jobs are different, right? And I would argue the very nature of work is starting to change. So why do you work? Do you work for money? Do you work for meaning, right? So that change that we're seeing And we've already talked a lot about change. I think like the big theme of the conference so far is how do we change human behavior? And the change that we're experiencing is dramatic and it's constant. We call it the VUCA environment. Has anybody heard that term? A couple of you? Okay, so it's a military term. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. What a great descriptor of the world that we live in, right? So we're seeing a lot of change. And we also have new generations in the workforce. And I'm going to try really hard not to make generalizations about the generations, but they are a little different, right? Millennials and Gen Z have a different desire for what work is going to be like for them. They don't want jobs, they want experiences. How do we give them those experiences and meet their expectations? But you know what? Millennials and Gen Z, they're actually human beings too. They're actually people. I don't know if you knew that, right? And so there are basic precepts of human behavior that we can leverage to understand how do we influence their behavior. And I think we have an opportunity to do that, again, in a more data-driven way. And that's not something that HR has been accustomed to, okay? Again, former HR practitioner, we have to get a lot better about understanding data. And there was some debate earlier in the day about should we hire HR people and teach them how to do that, or should we hire data scientists and teach them about HR, right? So the last piece here is really important. The whole goal of this, historically, HR, we've been like the referee of the organization, right? We're the one blowing the whistle saying, no, you can't do it. Who likes referees? Anyone? And I don't want to be a referee anymore. It's not about compliance and control and constraint. It's about enabling people to reach their full potential by using data, right? So again, we're seeing across the board in every country that we have clients, and that's a lot, this transformation that's happening, right? This disruption. We've seen it in the automotive industry. We're seeing it inside of organizations as well. And the focus right now, I think, a lot of times is on time. How are you spending time in those meetings? Are those quality meetings, right? And I would argue time is the most valuable commodity on the planet. Now, the nice thing about AI is it's actually going to give us more time to focus on higher value activities, because all of that administrative transactional stuff that none of us really want to do is going to get done for us by AI, by smart machines, right? And that's going to free us up and give us what I call digital autonomy, right? Yes, please.
Just one note on when you said the more time. So usually we see this a lot. We do take time away, but at the same time we also see a lot of FTE reductions happening at the same time. So
right, so the question was, a lot of times when we see this reduction in these administrative transactional things, now we don't need maybe as many people, so now we're gonna let those people go, right? So again, I wanna go back to what I said earlier about how AI isn't necessarily gonna kill jobs, it's going to change them, okay? So what we're seeing with most of our clients is not the desire to then reduce the workforce, but rather to redeploy people in more value-added areas of the business. Now that's scary for some people, right? Because they might think, I don't know how to do that. So I spent the last 10 years in healthcare where we've spent a lot of time and money moving to digital health records, and a lot of the nurses who were more tenured, they were really frightened by that. They were very apprehensive about using computer systems to chart for their patients, right? So that change factor, that fear factor, is something that we have to get past. But again, my point of emphasis here to respond to your question is it's not about reducing headcount. It's about redeploying people into areas of the business where they're actually going to add more value. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're measuring that value here in a minute. Does that help? Okay. Thanks for asking a question. Okay. So this notion of digital autonomy, again, so we have these, right, which gives us so much more flexibility, right? I can work from wherever, whenever. In fact, I was on a call last night at 1 o'clock in the morning because people don't seem to care that I'm over across the pond and it was really late. But again, I can do that. I can work anytime, anywhere. And there's new expectations really around the idea of what a career means, right? So there's been a little bit of talk about the gig economy and how it's funny. I've got 2 teenage daughters, 15 and 14, and you know, fast forward 10 years when they're actually in the workforce, hopefully, they might have 3 or 4 jobs at the same time, okay? And they'll look at me and be like, you only had one job? That's crazy. How dangerous. What if you lost your job, right? So these expectations about what a career means are totally being redefined. So I think one of the things we have a need to do, and I really appreciated the Microsoft presentation, by the way. I think one of the areas of focus you had was on how do we simplify people's lives and get rid of all of the distractions, right? How do we enable them to work the same way that they live? Pull this out, short, quick, intuitive interactions. Let me give you some feedback on that last meeting. Great job. That just went to you, your manager, and into your performance evaluation, so we can use that data later when we're doing performance evaluations formally, making promotion and compensation decisions, right? So again, how do we simplify people's work environments? And again, how do we use science, behavioral data, and then use that data to actually personalize people's experience at work? I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do some of that. And then combine all of that with data and evidence across the organization. The gentleman this morning, I think from Visier, talked about what are the top 5 things your CFO and CEO care about. That's what we have to layer on top of this. And when we do all of this right, we have the potential, at least, to significantly impact performance and productivity. And what's happening is we're really reimagining what work looks like. Does that make sense? You with me? Okay. So again, that's kind of the big picture, the why. So I want to talk about how people make decisions. Okay, so this guy on the left here, I want you to think about what body part do you use to make decisions? Okay, I want you to also notice that I cut him off at the waist. We probably shouldn't be making work-related decisions with body parts below the belt, right? And all I mean by that is you don't want to be making any knee-jerk reactions. I don't know what you are thinking, but... So we've already heard people say multiple times today, making gut decisions, right? And that's what we do. That's what we base a lot of decisions on. How do I feel? Should I hire Johan or not? I feel like he's going to be a great hire. Right? I don't have any data. And you know what I'm looking at? I'm looking at his resume, which is all what he did in the past. That tells me nothing about what he's going to do in the future, but that's kind of the traditional way of making decisions. And that translates on the organizational side to what? Reports. Here's what happened 3 months ago, right? Not very effective. So the other way a lot of us make decisions is with our heart, right? So Johan's not performing all that well. And I need to make a decision. I don't know what to do here, but I want to be sensitive to what's going to happen if we have to move on, right? So I'm thinking with my heart. Again, organizationally, I'm thinking about using that data of what's going to happen in the future, but I don't necessarily know. And then lastly, hopefully, a lot of us use our heads in making decisions as well. From an organizational perspective, that's where we can start logically thinking through the future. But now we have this opportunity to layer all of this data on top of these traditional decision-making models, right? To get away from the gut decisions and the heart decisions and to say, what does the data tell me I should do, okay? So that's the kind of setting the stage for the why. And now I want to talk about what could we be doing in terms of using all of this data. And let's face it, there is a ton of data out there, okay? We have like this deluge of data that is all a result of the binary breadcrumbs that we all leave, right, as we go through our day. Whether it's social media posts, whether it's stuff that we're doing in the Microsoft products, all of the data that's in our human capital systems, right? So one of the things that we've done is we have a team of industrial and organizational psychologists, and they have created an assessment technology that looks at 26 different cognitive, cultural, and behavioral characteristics, okay? And now we got a better sense for the behavioral DNA of each individual, and we can use that information to decide, should we bring you into this organization? Are you a good cultural fit? Again, that's a nebulous thing. It's really important, really hard to define, but we can actually use data to put some definition around, are you a good cultural fit? And then where in the organization should we put you? And then how do we use that data across your entire career to personalize your onboarding experience, to give you a unique career path, not for somebody that's in your job, hey, you're an accountant, well then the next thing is a senior accountant. No, for you uniquely, what's the next role for you? And it could be something completely different, right? Because millennials, again, aren't going to just change jobs multiple times. They are going to change careers multiple times. And if you don't give them visibility to opportunities to change careers in your organization, you're going to lose that institutional knowledge and that intellectual capital, aren't you? Do you have another question?
When you say these 26 different characteristics and you build them, are you also then looking into the bias in terms of ending, like weighing these when you want to look at a job or a role, so that you don't end up with 26 people who are all the exact same person?
Right. So the question for those of you who couldn't hear is, when you look at these 26 different characteristics, how do you avoid bias? How do you end up avoiding everybody in the room looking like me, right? And sounding like me? The funny thing is, we've done a study. So first of all, we've actually assessed 200 million people, okay? So we've got a very nice sample size. And we did a study of 50,000 hires where the system recommended that you hire somebody. And what we found is that diversity went up 26% in that 50,000 hires because the system said, this is the perfect person for you to hire, not the guy in the back of the room that looks and sounds a lot like you. So that's, I know, probably not what you would expect to hear, that you would expect that there might be some bias and that you might end up with too generic of a population, but actually the reality is the opposite. So again, we have all of this data. Frankly, I think sometimes we have too much data. And again, why aren't we emulating what other organizations like Amazon do, right? So we're all familiar with Amazon. So you order something on Amazon and they say, hey, if you like those shoes, you're really going to like these shoes, right? They have all of this data about us. Why aren't we doing the same thing at work? We've got all of this wonderful data that we could personalize your experience with, and we're not doing that. So instead of looking at that big picture and all the data, let's just look at 6 data points for 2 people, okay? So the top one is a performance metric. So these are retail people, and they're looking at how many sales per hour they average. You can see that the woman on the right has a much higher sales per hour than the gentleman on the left. You could also layer on top of that their attendance data. You can see she's got perfect attendance. He misses every once in a while. You can see her tenure is actually quite low. She's very new. He's been here a really long time. They have about the same salary, the same learning. She gets a little bit more overtime than he does. What happens when you start to aggregate this data at the individual level, you start to be able to make decisions predictively with that. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to develop a flight risk predictor. And I know we've had this conversation a little bit today as well. But again, instead of it simply saying, hey, manager, one of your people is a heightened flight risk, good luck. The system can actually say, okay, let's look at these different characteristics and then we can weight them. Which are most important? For instance, in this case, maybe this person is a heightened flight risk for 2 main factors. Number 1, they live an hour and a half from the office. So that commute is really tough for them. And the second is that they've not taken any time off in over 12 months. So the system actually recommends interventions. Pretty simple, right? In this case, take some time off. And to the manager, could this person maybe work from home 1 or 2 days a week so that you're starting to mitigate the impact of that extensive commute? Make sense? So again, how do we use this data at the individual level, but also how do we aggregate this at the enterprise level and start to put some definition around these things like performance? And maybe we can create a score, 0 to 100. Right? So 80 is better than 70. Everybody intuitively understands that. So when we combine all of this data, we can see at the individual level, maybe this person's pretty low, but organizationally, we're at 81%. So that gives us a feel for the engagement level, the engagement index, if you will, of the organization. So I imagine a lot of you use engagement surveys today. We've already talked about that a little bit. And I like engagement surveys too. The problem is, it's an incomplete picture. So think about going to the doctor. So when you go to the doctor, I assume that they ask you, how do you feel? The same thing as an engagement survey. How are you feeling? And you say, I feel pretty good. But then your doctor hopefully draws blood, right? And does some labs and comes back and says, your cholesterol's gone up 25% in 6 months. What's going on? right? So it's not like you were trying to keep that from them. You didn't know, right? So I think the same thing kind of happens in the corporate environment, right? Where people will tell you some things, other things they're not going to tell you because they're not that forthcoming in some of these engagement surveys, but the data doesn't lie, right? So how do we combine the conversation and the data? Was there a question? We're okay? Okay. So I want to land on how do we do this in a way where we're not driving the humanity out of human resources? Again, how do we go from making gut level decisions and not go too far afield to the other side? There's this great article in the Wall Street Journal from just last month, okay? And it's funny, it was actually talking about Amazon. Amazon is being sued because the contention is that they've been firing people just based on data. So if you think about how easy it is in an Amazon fulfillment center to measure performance, let's say there's 100 people in a fulfillment center and you order those shoes and that bag, and so I get my ticket and I go grab those items and I scan them in and I put them in a box and then I send them off. They can measure every aspect of that, right? So they can clearly define if you are significantly slower than your peers. So if you've got 100 people in that organization, the bottom 10, this author was like, eventually software is going to start firing people. Just bottom 10, you're out. And the problem with that is that maybe one of those 10 people is Johan, right? And Johan's been here for a long time. He's very tenured. He knows where everything is. He knows sometimes those handheld scanners don't work. He knows how to find things. And so people are constantly stopping him and saying, can you help me with this? And so that has had an impact on what his numbers show in terms of productivity. But the reality is he's one of the most valuable people we have, right? So you can't just make decisions based on the data. Agreed? Okay. So we can use data pretty effectively to understand where are there opportunities for improvement, where are there strengths that we should be accentuating, right? Where there are correlations between behavior and outcomes. So again, I spent a lot of time in healthcare. When we instituted this new training program, did we see a decrease in hospital-acquired pressure ulcers? Yes, we did. Okay, there's a correlation there. And then there also needs to be data to be able to identify, not subjective, but objective predictors of performance at the individual level and the organizational level. Now, again, we still have to use conversations to understand things that you just can't capture on a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are lazy. They don't tell you that much, right? So you actually have to talk to people, okay? And ask them what's going on and understand what makes each individual unique and valuable. And the most important thing that can happen when you do all of this is understanding this, okay? So, no, I'm not attempting to say it. I tried this, I was in Paris recently, and I talked about this word, and I tried to pronounce it, and there was somebody from Sweden in the audience, and I said, did I get it? And she was like, no. She said, that wasn't even close. So now I'm gun shy. I'm not going to say it. How do you pronounce it? Say it again? Okay. I was practicing last night at dinner, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Does everybody know what that means? The Scandinavian people are the only people on the planet with a word that essentially means happiness at work. Now, that's right. Only people on the planet. Now, the Japanese have a word that means death by work, but I thought that's probably less appropriate for this venue. But again, that's kind of the goal that we're getting at, right? If somebody is happy at work, then they're going to be more productive. They're going to be more efficient. They're going to be more engaged. That's the end goal, right? So, in terms of how this all actually works, we have tangible results. I know we saw a few from Microsoft in terms of the interaction with their clients. When you bring people into the organization and you put them into jobs that they were born to do, turnover can go down 46%. I've got case study after case study. This is actually from an organization in the States called Pilot Flying J, which is, they have 700 gas stations across the US. And what they have found is not only did they reduce turnover, but they were actually able to predict with accuracy how much turnover, when it went down, how much revenue went up in each individual store. You talked earlier about what the CFO and the CEO care about. They care about revenue, right? So turnover goes down, and there's an inverse relationship with revenue. Also, again, it's not just about turnover, because the CFO, again, if you're going to walk in with that platter of money that we were talking about earlier, turnover usually doesn't afford you the ability to walk into the CFO's office with cash. But again, we've also seen increases in sales per hour, in performance. We've even seen decreases in safety incidents, again, when people are more engaged. So you start combining all of this with all of this data. You start looking, when engagement goes up, how does that impact margins? How does that impact productivity? How does that impact all these other areas of the business? Make sense? All right. We got maybe a couple minutes for questions, comments, insults. All right. Thank you so much.